Ezekwe had some other things to say about Dr. Blyden. And this is very important because this sets the stage for his work, and it describes why his work was difficult for him at this time. He said, Dr. Blyden rightfully has been referred to as the father of African nationalism. And understand what he means here. Blyden is not the father of the resistance movements that we referred to under Ethiopianism that comes from Menelik, That's the old African nationalism, where traditional leaders are leading their armies against the European. Sekou Touré's grandfather came from this old traditional nationalism. Samurai Touré. T'Shaka, who's my namesake, comes from this old African nationalism, which is defending traditional African societies. When he's referring to him being the father of African nationalism, he's referring to the new nationalism that will arise in Africa, that leads to the independence of Africa. It's a different kind of nationalism, which I'll be describing. In his day, again, quoting Ezekwe, in his day, he was a lone voice in the wilderness when he disseminated ideas for the honest portrayal and appraisal of the African personality. For a very few of his contemporaries appreciated the gospel of this visionary or were able to comprehend the message of this dreamer. So he's telling you that while he's the greatest, one of the greatest Africans in history, he's the father of African nationalism. A lot of people hearing his message at that time, and we're talking particularly about a certain group of Africans that I'll come to in a minute, because of things that clouded their mind and their vision, couldn't appreciate what Blyden was teaching. But there were those who did. Now, when Ezekwe referred to the African personality, this is a concept created by Edward Wilmot Blyden. And it was the idea that Africans had a distinct culture that gave rise to the African personality. And this was an idea that Kwame Nkrumah adopted and often referred to the African personality. And when I talk about us having a distinct ethos and its creativity, that's our personality, And so when he's referring to the African personality, he's referring to the unique qualities of the African, noble qualities, which we'll be discussing in his views on African life and customs. So when Ezekwe said that few of his contemporaries could appreciate his visionary ideas on Africa, he was referring to those Africans who had been trained by European missionaries prior to the colonial enterprise. The colonial enterprise would start with the Berlin Conference in 1884 to 1885, where Europeans met and carved up Africa. And then out of that began their colonizing project, and Africa resisted and fought for a long time and won many battles. The Zulus fought with the Zulu discipline of Shaka. Under Setoweo at the Battle of Islandawa, they defeated the British square. That was almost an impossible thing to do because the British square consisted of soldiers, one in front of the other, using flintlocks. So these were one-shot rifles. And so when the first rank shot, then that first rank had to reload. The second rank shot. When the second rank shot, then the third and the fourth. And it was like continuous machine gun fire. The Zulus were so bad, they broke that. They broke it and wiped them out. Africans had a lot of victories. The Asante people, won every battle except the last. And I noted their warfare techniques. The only weakness in their warfare techniques is they sometimes didn't go all the way because they had a certain code. It was a humane code, but you know, when you're dealing with people who are savages, you got to go all the way. But the thing is, they had defenses against these Europeans that was mighty. And then you had samurai in his wars of resistance, who was called the Napoleon of West Africa. You had the Mahdi in the Sudan, whose soldiers against his orders sliced the head of Chinese Gordon off. And Chinese Gordon had led the opium trade in China. You hear me? So if you think these Africans rolled over, you got the wrong idea. They fought. When they came into the Caribbean, they fought. And when they came into the United States, they fought and were still fighting. So what happens is it's these missionary trained Africans who are being warned by Blyden about what they're facing, and they're being offered a different vision, but their vision is clouded. And so they have trouble understanding this. But these missionaries are missionaries in Africa prior to the colonial period. They're here before the colonial period. These missionaries came from Britain, Scotland, and France in the English-speaking part, well, and also France. What they wanted to do, and I mentioned some of this before, but I'm going into more detail now, and I'm focusing on Blyden's thought as an alternative and some of my own to what is now operating in Africa. What the missionaries wanted at this point, before the period of colonialism, is they wanted to create in West Africa, including Nigeria and other areas. And at this time, there was no Nigeria. It was Igbo, Yoruba, Hausa, different groups. What they sought to create was, in this part of Africa, a state, one or more, based on the system coming out of Europe, because these missionaries saw that as the only thing that would work, and they had no appreciation of African life and customs. So according to these missionaries, the state that would emerge, and this is part of what I'm doing a critique on, why this state system that Africa has now is no good. And if you don't alter this state system, you can unify, and it will be no good for the masses of Africa. These missionaries saw that this state system had to have three qualities. One, it had to be Christian, of course. Two, according to them, it needed to be civilized. Now, what's your definition of civilization? You see, as John Henry Clark said, to be civilized is to be civil, but that's not their definition of civilization. According to the missionaries, Africa needed civilization based on Christianity and technology coming out of the Industrial Revolution. And particularly what this meant was steam power and railroads. Now, what's interesting is the missionaries didn't say Africa needed Gatling guns. Now, Gatling guns was the old machine gun. These Gatling guns kept shooting, and that was what really gave the European the edge. They didn't see that. And of course, this is before the colonial period, but they knew the power of Europe was based on gunpowder, was based on cannon, was based on ships that could also fight at sea. That was British power, 300 years, based on, you know, the seas, controlling the seas. So they saw technology as civilization. And of course, that's not correct, but that's how they saw it. And then the third feature that they thought that Africa needed to do what Europe had done is that they needed large states. They didn't need these small states. Now, in this sense, they're thinking better than the colonizers would think later, who carved Africa up into all kinds of pieces, whether large or small, and mostly small, and wanted to keep them that way. And a lot of African states are still burdened by that. But these are the three ideas that these missionaries had. They saw the need for developing large states as a means for developing commerce and technology. So this was the European missionary dream, and this would be at least part of what Africa would draw on at independence unconsciously, because the leaders didn't question this, still haven't. The key thing is the missionaries confused culture with technology, and therefore they concluded that you couldn't have a technological transformation without the religious one. And I'll come back to that because that's false.